Amari Carter stood nervously outside the sprawling estate of the Winthrop family, the crisp autumn air doing little to calm the storm of emotions swirling within him. The grand, ivy-clad manor reflected the wealth and history of a family whose name was whispered in exclusive circles and whose legacy was deeply entwined with tradition, privilege, and unspoken rules. Tonight was supposed to be a simple dinner, a meeting of families as Amari prepared to take the next step in his relationship with Madison, the woman he loved. But beneath the polite invitations and forced smiles, a battle was quietly brewing. Amari, freshly graduated as the valedictorian of Harvard Law School, was a man who had fought tooth and nail against prejudice and low expectations his entire life. From the crowded streets of his childhood neighborhood to the hallowed halls of one of the world's most prestigious universities, he had been doubted, underestimated, and dismissed at every turn. Now, as he approached the threshold of the Winthrop home, he could feel the weight of their gazes, thinly veiled skepticism and quiet judgment that suggested his achievements were nothing more than a stroke of luck or a result of quotas and charity. Inside, Madison greeted him with a tentative smile, a flicker of apology in her eyes for what she feared was to come. The dining room was a spectacle of opulence, crystal chandeliers casting a soft glow over polished mahogany, fine china arranged with meticulous care, and the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the aroma of a gourmet meal. As Amari took his seat at the long gleaming table, he sensed the subtle shift in atmosphere. The Winthrops were watching, sizing him up like a rare specimen that didn't quite belong. Their conversation was thinly veiled in civility, but laced with condescension. It began with casual inquiries that quickly devolved into veiled insults, cloaked as jokes. "So, Amari," Madison's uncle said with a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes, "did you get into Harvard through some special program? I hear they have all kinds of initiatives nowadays." Laughter rippled around the table, sharp and hollow. Another relative leaned forward, smirking. "And what exactly does a valedictorian do? Give a speech about equality and justice, I suppose." Amari's jaw tightened as the questions and jabs kept coming, each one a reminder of the barriers he had fought to overcome. The family patriarch, Madison's father, looked him over with a mixture of disdain and curiosity, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Tell us, Amari, what do you actually know about the law? Can you defend yourself in a real court, or is this all just academic fluff?" The room fell silent, every eye fixed on Amari, waiting for a reaction. But instead of anger or retreat, Amari felt a calm resolve settle over him. He knew this moment was bigger than a single insult. It was a test of his dignity, his intelligence, and his very presence in a world that often sought to exclude him. Clearing his throat, he began, "I'd be happy to share what I've learned. The law isn't just rules written on paper, it's a living framework that shapes our society, protects the vulnerable, and holds power accountable." What followed was not a defensive rant, but a masterclass delivered with clarity and grace. Amari recounted landmark cases, the nuances of constitutional law, and the ongoing struggle for civil rights that had defined both his personal journey and the nation's history. He spoke of Brown versus Board of Education, the courage of those who challenged segregation, and the continuing fight for justice in modern courts. His voice was steady, his arguments well-reasoned, and his passion undeniable. As he spoke, the faces around the table shifted, from smirks to stunned silence, from condescension to reluctant respect. Even the most skeptical couldn't deny the brilliance in his words, the depth of his knowledge, and the strength of his character. Madison watched with pride and a newfound understanding of the man she loved, someone who refused to be diminished or defined by others' biases. The conversation that began as a trial of Amari's worth transformed into a powerful lesson for everyone present. By the time the dinner ended, the room was not just quiet, it was humbled. The Winthrops had been forced to confront their assumptions, and perhaps for the first time, see Amari not as an outsider but as an equal. That night the seed of change was planted, and Amari Carter's voice became a beacon, reminding all that true greatness is measured not by pedigree or wealth, but by integrity, intellect, and the courage to stand tall against adversity. Amari sat back for a moment, letting the tension in the room simmer as the weight of his words settled over the Winthrop family, like an undeniable truth that could no longer be ignored. The smug glances and veiled smirks that had filled the air just minutes before were replaced by an unsettling silence, the kind that is felt in bones and heard in the absence of all noise. It was clear now that this wasn't just a casual dinner conversation, it was a reckoning, and Amari had just delivered the opening statement. As the seconds stretched on, his mind raced through the countless moments of doubt and dismissal he had endured throughout his life. The teachers who underestimated him, the classmates who whispered behind his back, the subtle bias that followed him even through the hallowed halls of Harvard Law. Those moments of exclusion, of being told he didn't belong, had forged a fire inside him that no amount of scorn could extinguish. Tonight, that fire burned brighter than ever. The family patriarch who had spoken with such arrogance and disdain now sat rigid, his usual composure cracked by the realization that this young man was no ordinary guest. Amari's precise and respectful rebuttals had dismantled every assumption, every prejudice they had thrown at him. He had spoken not only with the authority of an academic, but with the lived experience of someone who understood the law, not just as an abstract concept, but as a tool for justice and change. Madison's eyes were wide with awe and pride. She had known Amari was brilliant, but seeing him command the room with such grace and intelligence, calmly silencing a family steeped in tradition and entitlement, was something else entirely. Her love for him deepened in that moment, her previous hesitations fading into nothingness. One of the uncles, his face flushed with embarrassment, attempted to interject, trying to regain control of the conversation with a dismissive chuckle. But Amari met the interruption with a steady gaze and a measured response, citing case law and historical precedents that even the seasoned lawyer in the family found difficult to refute. Each fact he presented, each legal principle he explained, was a carefully aimed arrow piercing the armor of privilege that shielded the Winthrops' ignorance. The room, once filled with condescension, now felt like a courtroom in session, with Amari as the eloquent advocate, laying bare truths they had long ignored. The other guests shifted uneasily in their seats, realizing that the narrative they had rehearsed was unraveling before their very eyes. Amari paused, his voice lowering, slightly as he offered an invitation laced with quiet challenge. Any other questions? There was none. Not a single word was uttered. The silence was profound, not the polite quiet of a dinner table, but the stunned hush that follows a powerful revelation. In that charged atmosphere, Amari's dignity shone brightest, proving that true power is not raised voices or forceful gestures, but the quiet strength of knowledge and self-respect. That night, the Winthrops' long-held assumptions were not just questioned, they were shattered, and the room fell silent in the wake of a young man whose brilliance demanded recognition and respect. Amari Carter's victory at the Winthrop dinner was not merely a momentary triumph, but the spark that ignited a firestorm within the tightly knit social circles that had long defined Madison's world, sending ripples far beyond that opulent dining room. News of the confrontation spread rapidly through whispered conversations at country clubs, charity galas, and corporate boardrooms, polarizing opinions. Some dismissed Amari as an anomaly or an upstart, while others marveled at the young man who had so effortlessly dismantled years of elitist assumptions with nothing but his intellect and poise. Even the most stubborn members of the Winthrop family found themselves unable to ignore the undeniable impact of that night, with Madison's father, once dismissive and scornful, reluctantly revisiting Amari's Harvard Law valedictory speech. After it was circulated among his colleagues at the prestigious law firm where he was a partner, the subject line emblazoned simply as genius, sparking a grudging admiration and a reluctant reassessment of his preconceived notions. Meanwhile, Madison herself, caught between the familiar comforts of her upbringing and the newfound respect and love she held for Amari, began to question the rigid walls of elitism and unspoken prejudice she had taken for granted all her life. Courageously confronting her parents in a heated and emotional exchange, where her mother's casual remark, "He's so articulate for someone from his background," was met with fierce rebuke. Madison's voice rising with indignation as she declared, "His background? You mean brilliance, grit, and twice the IQ of anyone at this table? words that cut through the veneer of tradition and forced the family to confront uncomfortable truths about their biases and blind spots. The Winthrops, accustomed to unquestioned authority and deference, found themselves unsettled and challenged as the mirror Amari held up to them reflected not just his own excellence, but their own limitations and prejudices, exposing the fragility beneath their proud facades. Yet amid this social upheaval, Amari remained focused on his path, his dignity and achievements carrying him forward as clerkship offers arrived from esteemed judges. Think tanks sought his insight on pressing legal issues, and invitations to speak at major law conferences poured in from coast to coast, each opportunity a testament to his undeniable talent and the respect he had earned through hard work and unwavering resolve. But despite the accolades and growing recognition, the moment that lingered most in Amari's heart was not the applause or the honors, but the quiet yet profound victory of that dinner, when, faced with scorn and skepticism, he stood unshaken, speaking truth with a calm brilliance that silenced a room and reshaped the perceptions of an entire family, proving that intellect and integrity can break down walls and that the power of one voice, spoken with conviction and grace, can echo far beyond any single evening, inspiring change and opening doors once thought forever closed. Amari Carter's journey from the tense, judgment-laden dinner to becoming an emblem of brilliance and integrity culminated months later when he and Madison returned to the grand Winthrop estate, not as tentative lovers tiptoeing through social minefields but as equals who had reshaped perceptions and challenged deeply entrenched prejudices. This time, Amari arrived freshly appointed to a prestigious federal advisory board on civil liberties, a role that signaled not only his legal acumen but his rising influence in shaping the nation's future. And as they entered the familiar halls, the atmosphere was palpably different. The once frosty gazes had thawed into respectful acknowledgement, the whispered doubts replaced by cautious admiration, for the Winthrops could no longer ignore the undeniable fact that Amari was not simply a man of promise, but a man whose excellence was now a matter of public record. At a high-profile charity gala held within the mansion's resplendent ballroom, Madison's father, the family patriarch who had once dismissed Amari with barely concealed disdain, took the microphone to introduce him to a gathering of dignitaries, lawyers and influential figures, including a revered Supreme Court justice, shaking Amari's hand with a nervous smile and pronouncing, "This young man will rewrite the law one day," words that resonated throughout the room as a testament to Amari's triumph not just over social barriers, but over the rigid hierarchies that privilege had long upheld. Amari's own smile in response was quiet, humble, and confident. He had come to understand that true power is earned not through boasting or confrontation, but through unwavering dedication, excellence, and the steady pursuit of justice. And in that moment he needed no further validation, for his work and character spoke louder than any accolade or introduction. Beyond the glitz and ceremony, the real impact of that night, and indeed of his entire journey, was in dismantling the limits imposed by legacy and exposing the hollow foundations of entitlement when confronted with genuine merit and lived experience. Inspired by the transformative power of his own story, Amari took up the mantle of mentorship, reaching out to Madison's younger cousins who sought his guidance and wisdom, and extending his influence far beyond privileged circles by organizing legal literacy workshops for underprivileged teens, empowering the next generation with the tools and knowledge to claim their own futures against all odds. The very speech he had delivered on that fateful evening in the Winthrop dining room, which had silenced scorn and challenged arrogance, was transcribed and adopted as a foundational case study in a Columbia Law Ethics seminar entitled "When Integrity Meets Arrogance," ensuring that future lawyers, judges, and advocates would grapple with the lessons of humility, respect, and the power of truth spoken with grace. Years down the line, when stories of resilience and triumph were recounted, it would not be the boy who was mocked and doubted that lingered in memory, but the man who answered scorn not with anger, but with brilliance, a man whose voice, calm and unwavering, had the power to silence a room and transform a world, proving that real change comes not from shouting louder, but from speaking wisely and standing firmly in one's truth.